I'm Jessica Morgan, and this is the story of how my wedding day turned from the happiest moment of my life into a battlefield of accusations, only to end with a revelation that left an entire room speechless. You think you know how stories about gold diggers end, but trust me, this twist will shake you to your core. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What started as a fairy tale romance became a nightmare of whispered judgments and cruel assumptions. But sometimes the people who underestimate you the most are the ones who need the biggest wake-up call. And sometimes that wake-up call comes with a $200 million inheritance announcement that changes everything forever. The morning light filtered through the sheer curtains of my modest apartment above Henderson's Bookstore in downtown Millbrook, Connecticut. As I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the wedding dress hanging on my closet door, I couldn't shake the knot of anxiety that had been growing in my stomach for weeks. Today was supposed to be the most beautiful day of my life, but instead, I felt like I was preparing for battle. My name is Jessica Morgan, though everyone calls me Jess, and at 26, I've learned that love doesn't always conquer all, especially when your future in-laws think you're a fortune hunter trying to steal their precious son away from his rightful destiny. The irony of their accusations would have been laughable if it weren't so painful. Little did they know that by midnight tonight, I would become one of the wealthiest women in Connecticut. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, because understanding how I ended up in this situation requires knowing who I really am and who I've been pretending to be. Growing up in Millbrook was like living in a postcard. Tree-lined streets, historic colonial homes, manicured lawns that looked like they belonged in a magazine. My grandmother, Eleanor Morgan, raised me in Rosewood Manor, a sprawling estate on the outskirts of town that had been in our family for over a century. The Morgan name carried weight in Millbrook. Old money, established legacy, the kind of family that had streets named after them. When I was 8 years old, my parents died in a car accident during a business trip to Europe. My father, William Morgan, had been managing the family's extensive real estate and shipping investments, while my mother, Catherine, had devoted herself to philanthropic work. Overnight, I went from being their beloved daughter to being the sole heir of a fortune I couldn't even comprehend. My grandmother made a decision that would shape the next 18 years of my life. She decided to raise me away from the spotlight of wealth, away from the social climbing and superficial relationships that often came with money. She wanted me to understand the value of work, the importance of character, and most importantly, she wanted me to find love that wasn't motivated by dollar signs. So while Rosewood Manor remained our family home, complete with its staff and grandeur, I was enrolled in public school. I had a small allowance, nothing extravagant, and I was encouraged to work part-time jobs during high school. My grandmother told everyone in town that the family had faced financial difficulties after my parents' death, that we were maintaining the estate but living modestly. It wasn't entirely untrue. She was simply choosing not to touch the principal of our investments, letting them grow while we lived on a fraction of the interest. The truth was, the Morgan Family Trust was worth over $200 million. Shipping investments, real estate holdings across New England, blue-chip stocks that had been accumulating value for generations. But according to the terms set up by my great-grandfather and modified by my grandmother, I wouldn't gain access to this inheritance until I turned 25 or got married, whichever came first. The idea was to ensure I was mature enough to handle such responsibility, and hopefully settled enough in life to make wise decisions. My grandmother passed away last year, just 2 months before my 25th birthday. In her will, she left me one final gift, the continuation of the trust arrangement. She wrote that she hoped I would find someone who loved Jessica the librarian, not Jessica the heiress. She wanted me to experience authentic relationships before wealth could complicate them. And I thought I had found that with Ryan Thompson. I met Ryan 18 months ago at the Millbrook Public Library, where I'd been working since graduating college with my degree in literature. I loved my job, the quiet sanctuary of books, helping community members find information they needed, organizing reading programs for children. The salary was modest, barely enough to afford my small apartment above the bookstore, but it felt honest and meaningful. Ryan had come in looking for historical research about Connecticut's colonial architecture for a project his construction company was bidding on. He was different from the men I usually encountered. Straightforward, unpretentious, with calloused hands that spoke of real work. When he asked me out for coffee after our third research session, I said yes without hesitation. For months, our relationship felt like something out of a romance novel. Ryan would pick me up after work in his well-worn pickup truck, and we'd drive to scenic overlooks or small diners where we'd talk for hours. He told me about his dreams of expanding his family's construction business, about wanting to build homes that families could afford, not just luxury estates for the wealthy. I told him about my love of literature, my plans to maybe write a novel someday, my simple dreams of a life filled with books and love. He never made me feel inadequate about my modest lifestyle. When we went out, he chose places that fit my supposed budget, never making me feel like I couldn't keep up. He seemed genuinely attracted to my intelligence, my humor, my passion for literature and community service. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like someone was seeing me, really seeing me, without the complication of money. The problems started when Ryan brought me home to meet his family. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The Thompson family lived in a large colonial house on Elm Street, in what they considered the established part of Millbrook. Robert Thompson owned Thompson Construction, a company his father had started in the 1960s. They weren't wealthy by old Millbrook standards, but they were comfortable, upper middle class with aspirations of something greater. Patricia Thompson, Ryan's mother, had been a real estate agent before becoming a full-time homemaker and self-appointed guardian of the family's social status. The first family dinner was awkward but not hostile. Patricia asked polite questions about my job, though I could see her calculating what a librarian's salary might be. Robert seemed genuinely interested in my work, asking about the historical archives and community programs. Ryan's sister Ashley, who had married a lawyer and moved to the more prestigious north end of town, was cordial but distant. His brother Kevin, who worked for the family construction company, mostly focused on his food. It was during the second family gathering that the comments began. "It's so sweet that you're pursuing your passion," Patricia said as she served dessert. "Even though library work doesn't really offer much in terms of career advancement or financial stability." "Jessica loves literature, Mom," Ryan said, squeezing my hand under the table. "Not everyone needs to chase money to be fulfilled." "Of course not, dear," Patricia replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I just think it's important for young couples to be realistic about their financial future," Ashley chimed in from across the table. "Especially if they want children someday. Daycare costs, college funds, it all adds up so quickly." I felt my cheeks burn, but kept my voice steady. I believe there are many ways to build a meaningful life together. Financial stability is important, but it's not the only measure of success. "Absolutely," Robert agreed, though he seemed uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Hard work and character matter most. But I could see the wheels turning in Patricia's mind. Over the following months, as Ryan and I became more serious, her comments became more pointed. She would mention how expensive the country club membership was, how much Ashley's wedding had cost, how important it was for the Thompson family to maintain their standing in the community. When Ryan proposed to me last spring in the gazebo at Millbrook Common, I was overjoyed. The ring was modest but beautiful, and his proposal was heartfelt and romantic. But even in that perfect moment, I could already anticipate the challenges. ahead. I knew his family would have opinions about our engagement, about the wedding, about our future together. I was right to be worried. The wedding planning process became a months-long exercise in subtle humiliation. Patricia insisted on hosting an engagement party at the country club, despite my suggestion that we could have something simple at my apartment or the library's community room. When I offered to contribute to the costs, she waved me away with a patronizing smile. "Don't worry about that, dear. We understand your situation. The Thompson family will handle all the important expenses." She said it kindly enough, but the underlying message was clear. I couldn't afford to contribute to my own engagement party, so I should be grateful they were taking care of everything. The guest list became another source of tension. My side was notably smaller. I had my best friend Amanda Chen, who worked as a social worker in Hartford, a few colleagues from the library, some neighbors from my apartment building. No parents, obviously, and my grandmother's death meant no extended family either. The Thompson side included business associates, country club friends, and what Patricia called important members of the Millbrook community. During the party, I overheard conversations that made my stomach churn. "She seems sweet enough," one of Patricia's friends said while I was getting punch, "but honestly, what does she bring to the marriage? No family connections, no money, no real career prospects." "I heard she lives above a bookstore," another woman replied. "Can you imagine? Patricia must be beside herself." "Well, Ryan was always the romantic type. Hopefully he'll come to his senses before it's too late." I wanted to disappear into the floor. These women didn't know me, had barely spoken to me, but they felt comfortable discussing my worth as a human being based on my perceived financial status. And the worst part was that Ryan seemed oblivious to it all, chatting happily with his college friends and business contacts. The wedding dress shopping trip was particularly painful. Patricia had insisted on coming along, claiming she wanted to help since I didn't have a mother to guide me. I had already found a beautiful dress at a small boutique in town. Elegant, classic, within what she assumed was my budget. But Patricia kept steering us toward more expensive shops, pointing out dresses that cost more than I supposedly made in several months. "This one would be perfect," she said, holding up a gown that cost $8,000. "Of course, it might be a bit outside your price range, but perhaps we could help." The offer came with such condescension that I felt nauseated. I politely declined and stuck with my original choice, a dress that was beautiful and cost a reasonable $1,200. But I could see the disappointment in Patricia's eyes, as if my choice confirmed everything she believed about my inability to live up to Thompson family standards. The final straw came during a family dinner 3 weeks before the wedding. Ashley was going on about her friend's destination wedding in Tuscany, describing the elaborate details and astronomical costs. Patricia sighed wistfully. "It sounds absolutely divine. I do hope we'll be able to plan something similar for Kevin when he gets engaged." "Well," Ashley said with a pointed look at me, "at least you won't have to worry about Jessica expecting anything too extravagant. I'm sure she understands the need to be practical." Kevin, who usually stayed out of family politics, chimed in. "Yeah, it's probably better to keep things simple when budgets are tight." Ryan finally spoke up. "Jessica isn't marrying me for money, if that's what you're implying." "Of course not," Patricia said quickly. "We would never suggest such a thing. We're just being realistic about financial differences." But Ashley couldn't leave it alone. "I'm just saying, it's convenient that she found someone from a family that can provide for her. Some people might see that as opportunistic." The word hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Opportunistic. They didn't say gold digger outright, but the implication was crystal clear. I excused myself to the bathroom, where I sat on the edge of the bathtub and tried to compose myself. These people thought I was using their son, manipulating him for financial gain. They couldn't conceive that someone might love Ryan for his kindness, his integrity, his dreams and ambitions. In their worldview, someone of my supposed social and financial status could only be interested in what he could provide. If only they knew the truth. Back in my apartment that night, I called Mr. Harold Stevens, my grandmother's lawyer and the executor of the family trust. He had been checking in with me periodically since my grandmother's death, preparing for the inheritance transfer that would happen on my 25th birthday, or my wedding day, whichever came first. "Harold," I said when he answered, "I need to ask you something about the trust arrangements." "Of course, Jessica. How can I help?" "The timeline for the inheritance. It transfers when I get married, correct?" "Yes, that's right. The trust dissolves at midnight on your wedding day, and all assets transfer to your personal control. The total value as of last month's assessment is approximately $203 million. Even hearing the number again made my head spin. "And there's no way to delay it? No way to keep it quiet for a while longer?" Harold was quiet for a moment. "Jessica, is everything all right? Are you having second thoughts about the marriage?" "No, it's not that. I love Ryan completely. It's just, his family has some very strong opinions about my financial situation, and I'm worried about how they'll react." "Ah, I see. Well, legally speaking, the trust terms are quite clear. Your grandmother was very specific about the timing. She felt that marriage represented a level of maturity and commitment that warranted full control of the inheritance. What if I don't tell them right away? What if I just let the money transfer quietly and tell them later?" "That's certainly your prerogative. The transfer happens automatically at midnight on your wedding day, but there's no requirement for you to announce it immediately. However, Jessica, I would strongly recommend not keeping such a significant secret from your new husband. Financial transparency is crucial in a marriage." I knew he was right, but the thought of suddenly becoming enormously wealthy on my wedding day felt overwhelming. How do you tell someone you've been essentially lying about your circumstances for your entire relationship? How do you explain that every assumption they've made about your life has been carefully constructed fiction? But as I hung up the phone and looked around my small apartment, my sanctuary for the past few years, I realized that maybe it was time for the truth to come out. Maybe it was time for the Thompson family to learn that their assumptions about social status and worth were about to be turned completely upside down. I had no idea how prophetic that thought would turn out to be. The week leading up to the wedding was a blur of final preparations, family tensions, and increasingly hurtful comments from the Thompson family. Patricia made sure to mention several times how brave I was to marry into a family that could take care of me. Ashley made pointed remarks about how lucky I was to escape my limited circumstances. Even Kevin, who I had always thought was the most reasonable of Ryan's siblings, made a comment about how I should be grateful for the opportunity to join such an established family. Through it all, Ryan remained largely oblivious. When I tried to bring up his family's attitude toward me, he would dismiss it as minor personality conflicts or suggest that they were just protective and would warm up to me over time. He couldn't see, or chose not to see, the subtle cruelty in their behavior. The night before the wedding, I lay awake staring at the ceiling of my apartment, knowing it would be my last night there as Jessica the librarian. Tomorrow, whether I was ready or not, I would become Jessica the heiress. The trust would transfer, the money would become mine, and somehow I would have to navigate the aftermath. I had made a decision earlier that week. I wouldn't announce the inheritance during the wedding ceremony. That would overshadow what should be a celebration of Ryan's and my love. But if his family continued their pattern of subtle insults and condescending remarks, if they pushed me too far, I might not be able to keep the secret much longer. As I finally drifted off to sleep, I had no idea that within 24 hours, the Thompson family's carefully constructed social hierarchy would come crashing down around them. I had no idea that their assumptions about gold diggers and opportunistic women would be turned so completely inside out that they would question everything they thought they knew about money, class, and worth. All I knew was that tomorrow, one way or another, the truth was going to come out. The morning of my wedding day arrived with the kind of crisp October sunshine that makes Connecticut look like a postcard. I woke up in my small apartment for the last time, knowing that by evening I would be Mrs. Ryan Thompson and secretly one of the wealthiest women in New England. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was getting ready for what should be the happiest day of my life while dreading the social minefield that awaited me at the reception. Amanda arrived at 8 sharp with coffee, bagels, and the kind of nervous energy that only a best friend can bring to your wedding day. She had been my roommate in college, and despite our different career paths, she as a social worker in Hartford, me as a small-town librarian, we had remained incredibly close. More importantly, she was one of the few people who knew something was different about my financial situation, though even she didn't know the full extent of it. "Okay, bride," she announced, setting down the coffee and immediately beginning to fuss with my hair. "Today is your day to shine. Are you ready to become part of the Thompson dynasty?" I caught the slight sarcasm in her voice. Amanda had attended enough family gatherings to witness Patricia's subtle digs and Ashley's condescending remarks. She had also been present at my engagement party, where she had overheard some of the comments about my supposed fortune-hunting intentions. "I'm ready to marry Ryan," I said carefully, sipping my coffee and watching her reflection in my bedroom mirror. "Everything else is just noise." "Jess," Amanda turned to face me directly, her expression serious. "I've been your friend for 8 years. I know you better than anyone, and I know something's going on that you're not telling me." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "I mean that for someone who supposedly struggles financially, you're remarkably calm about money. You never stress about bills, you never seem to calculate costs when we go out, and you have this underlying confidence that doesn't match someone who's supposedly living paycheck to paycheck." I set down my coffee cup, my hands suddenly trembling. Amanda was more perceptive than I had given her credit for. "It's complicated." "Is it about your grandmother? About the estate?" I stared at her in shock. "How did you—" "Jess, I'm a social worker. I'm trained to notice when people's stories don't quite add up. Your grandmother supposedly lost money after your parents died. But you grew up in that mansion. You went to private tutoring, had music lessons, traveled to Europe for your college, semester abroad. None of that matches the narrative of a family struggling financially." The weight of keeping this secret suddenly felt overwhelming. I had been carrying it alone for so long, through months of humiliation and subtle insults from Ryan's family, and here was my best friend offering to share the burden. "The trust activates today," I whispered. "At midnight. Everything transfers. To me." Amanda's eyes widened. "Everything meaning what exactly?" "Everything meaning approximately $200 million. The coffee cup slipped from Amanda's hands and shattered on my bedroom floor. For a moment, we both stared at the broken pieces, as if they represented all the assumptions and pretenses that were about to shatter along with them. $200 million, Amanda repeated slowly. "Jess, what the hell?" I spent the next hour explaining everything. My grandmother's plan, the trust structure, my decision to live modestly and work at the library, my relationship with Ryan, and his family's increasingly hostile attitude toward my supposed poverty. Amanda listened with the intensity she usually reserved for her most challenging cases, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly just absorbing the magnitude of what I was telling her. "So tonight," she said finally, "when the Thompson family is making their little speeches about welcoming you into their social circle and providing for you financially, you'll actually be worth more than all of them combined." "Approximately 40 times more than all of them combined," I corrected, "based on what I know about their assets." Amanda started laughing, not the kind of laughter that comes from humor, but the kind that comes from pure disbelief at the absurdity of a situation. "Jess, this is insane. You've been letting these people treat you like you're some kind of charity case while you're secretly an heiress." I wanted Ryan to love me for who I am, not what I have. And what about you? Don't you deserve to know whether he can love and defend you when other people attack your character? Because from what I've seen, he's been doing a pretty poor job of standing up for you. Her words hit harder than I expected, because they echoed doubts I had been suppressing for months. Ryan was a good man with a kind heart, but he had consistently failed to see or address his family's treatment of me. Every time I tried to discuss it, he would minimize their behavior or suggest I was being too sensitive. "Today changes everything," I said finally. "After today, there won't be any more questions about my intentions or my worth." "The question is," Amanda said, "are you going to tell them, or are you going to let them figure it out on their own?" Before I could answer, my phone rang. It was Ryan, calling from his parents' house where he had spent the night in accordance with some traditional superstition about not seeing the bride before the wedding. "Good morning, beautiful." His voice was warm and excited. "Are you ready? To become my wife?" "More ready than you know," I replied, catching Amanda's knowing look. "My mom wants to know if you need anything for getting ready. She has her hair and makeup team coming to the house, and she said you're welcome to join us here instead of doing everything at your apartment." I glanced around my small bedroom, with Amanda sitting cross-legged on my bed surrounded by scattered jewelry and the broken coffee cup we still hadn't cleaned up. The offer was generous, but I knew it came with strings attached. Patricia would use the opportunity to make more subtle comments about my background, and I wasn't sure I could handle that kind of stress on my wedding morning. "That's very thoughtful. But Amanda and I have everything under control here. I'll see you at the church." "Okay, love you." "Love you too." After I hung up, Amanda shook her head. "Even today, even on your wedding day, he's still trying to manage his family's opinions instead of just focusing on you. He's trying to be considerate. He's trying to avoid conflict. There's a difference." The next few hours passed in a blur of hair, makeup, and the kind of nervous energy that comes with knowing your life is about to change in ways that no one around you can imagine. Amanda helped me into my wedding dress, the simple but elegant gown that Patricia had deemed appropriate for my budget, and fastened my grandmother's pearl necklace around my neck. It was one of the few pieces of family jewelry I had kept with me during my years of living modestly, and wearing it felt like carrying her strength with me into whatever lay ahead. As we prepared to leave for the church, Amanda grabbed my hands and looked me directly in the eyes. "Jess, I need you to promise me something." "What?" "Promise me that if his family crosses the line today, if they say something truly awful about you being a gold digger or whatever other garbage they've been spouting, you won't just sit there and take it. You have the power to defend yourself now, and you should use it." I nodded, though I wasn't entirely sure what that defense might look like. I had spent so many months absorbing their subtle insults and condescending remarks that the idea of fighting back felt foreign. The ceremony at St. Matthew's Episcopal Church was beautiful and mercifully brief. Father Mitchell, who had known my grandmother and remembered me as a child, performed the service with warmth and dignity. Ryan looked handsome in his navy suit, his face glowing with genuine happiness as I walked down the aisle. For those 30 minutes, surrounded by flowers and candlelight and the simple ritual of marriage vows, I almost forgot about everything else. Ryan's vows were heartfelt and romantic, speaking about how I had brought literature and culture into his life, how I had taught him to see beauty in simple things, how he looked forward to building a life together based on love rather than material concerns. When he said that last part, I saw Patricia shift uncomfortably in the front pew, as if the implication that material concerns weren't paramount somehow reflected poorly on her family's values. My own vows focused on Ryan's integrity, his kindness, his dreams of building homes for families who needed them. I spoke about how he had seen value in me as a person, rather than focusing on external circumstances. Again, I caught some pointed looks from the Thompson family section, though I couldn't tell if they were interpreting my words as gratitude for their son's charity or as some kind of subtle criticism. After the ceremony, we gathered outside the church for photographs. The October air was crisp but sunny, and the old stone church provided a picturesque backdrop. But even during this joyful moment, I could hear snippets of conversation from Ryan's extended family and family friends that made my stomach tighten. "She does look lovely in that dress," one of Patricia's cousins remarked. "Simple, but appropriate." "I heard they're going on a modest honeymoon," another woman replied. "Somewhere local." Of course, with her situation, they have to be practical. "It's actually quite sweet how Ryan doesn't seem to mind the financial disparity," a third voice chimed in. "Though I do wonder how they'll manage long term." I wanted to scream that we weren't going on a modest honeymoon by necessity. We were going to a bed and breakfast in Vermont because we both loved the fall foliage and quiet charm of small New England towns. But I bit my tongue and smiled for the photographer, knowing that in just a few hours, all of these assumptions would be revealed as completely baseless. The reception at Millbrook Country Club was everything Patricia had envisioned: elegant, traditional, and designed to showcase the Thompson family's standing in the community. The ballroom was decorated with white roses and gold accents, round tables set with fine china and crystal glasses. A string quartet played classical music, while guests enjoyed cocktails on the terrace overlooking the golf course. I should have been enjoying every moment, but instead, I felt like I was attending my own execution. Every conversation seemed to revolve around money, status, or the future financial arrangements of my marriage. Patricia made sure to introduce me to her friends as Ryan's lovely wife, while somehow managing to convey that my loveliness was my primary, and perhaps only, asset. During the cocktail hour, I overheard Ashley talking to a group of her former sorority sisters who had driven up from New York for the wedding. "It's actually kind of romantic," she was saying, "how Ryan fell for someone so completely different from our family's usual type. Though honestly, I'm not sure how they're going to afford children on a construction manager's salary and whatever she makes at the library." "How much do librarians even make?" one of her friends asked. "I can't imagine it's much. Maybe $30,000 a year? Certainly not enough to contribute meaningfully to a household." "Well, at least she'll never be accused of marrying him for money," another friend laughed, "since he doesn't really have any." The casual cruelty of their laughter made my hands clench into fists. They were discussing my worth as a human being, my contribution to my own marriage, my financial value, as if I were livestock being evaluated for purchase. And the worst part was that Ryan was across the room talking business with his father and uncle, completely oblivious to the character assassination happening 30 feet away. Amanda appeared at my elbow with a glass of champagne and a concerned expression. "You look like you're about to commit murder." "I'm considering it," I muttered. "What happened now?" I repeated Ashley's conversation, watching Amanda's face grow darker with each detail. "Jess, you cannot let them continue this. It's your wedding day. You should be celebrating, not enduring this kind of disrespect." "What am I supposed to do? March over there and announce that I'm actually richer than all of them combined?" "Yes," Amanda said firmly. "Exactly that." Before I could respond, the wedding coordinator announced that dinner was about to be served. We found our seats at the head table, where I was positioned between Ryan and his father, Robert. The placement should have been an honor, but it felt more like being positioned for maximum scrutiny. Robert, to his credit, seemed to be making an effort to include me in conversation. He asked about my work at the library, about my interest in historical preservation, about my thoughts on community development in Millbrook. His questions felt genuine rather than condescending, and I began to relax slightly in his presence. "You know, Jessica," he said as the salad course was being served, "I've been thinking about what you said during the engagement party about the importance of affordable housing in our community. It's something our company should consider more seriously." "I appreciate that, Mr. Thompson. I think there's real opportunity to create beautiful, well-built homes that don't require families to sacrifice their entire income to housing costs." "Bob, please, we're family now, and I agree completely. Too many developers focus only on luxury markets because the margins are higher. But there's something to be said for building homes that serve the community broadly." For a moment, I felt hopeful that perhaps not all of the Thompson family shared Patricia's narrow focus on social status and financial hierarchy. But that hope was quickly crushed by Patricia herself, who had apparently been listening to our conversation from her seat across the table. "Oh, Robert, you're so idealistic," she said with a patronizing smile. "Of course, affordable housing sounds wonderful in theory, but the reality is that construction companies need to maintain certain profit margins to survive. We can't all afford to be charitable with our business decisions." The implication was clear. Easy for me to advocate for affordable housing when I didn't understand the financial realities of running a business. I felt my cheeks burn with frustration, but before I could respond, the wedding coordinator was calling for attention as the speeches began. Ryan's best man, his college roommate David, gave a sweet speech about their friendship and how happy he was to see Ryan find love. Ashley followed with a maid of honor speech that was technically appropriate, but somehow managed to suggest that I was lucky to be marrying into such a wonderful family. Kevin spoke briefly about family traditions and welcoming new members into the Thompson legacy. Then it was Robert's turn. He stood and raised his champagne glass, looking around the room with the confidence of a man accustomed to being heard. "Friends and family," he began. "Today we celebrate not just the marriage of Ryan and Jessica, but the joining of two very different worlds. Ryan has chosen to marry for love rather than convenience, for character rather than circumstance. Jessica may not bring financial assets to this marriage, but she brings something far more valuable: a good heart, a sharp mind, and a genuine appreciation for the simple pleasures in life." The speech was meant to be complimentary, but every word felt like a backhanded insult. He was literally telling a room full of people that I was poor but worthy, that my primary value lay in my gratitude for simple pleasures rather than any concrete contributions I might make. Around the room, I could see guests nodding approvingly at his magnanimous acceptance of his son's choice to marry beneath his station. Amanda caught my eye from her seat at a nearby table and mouthed, "Now." She was right. This had gone far enough. But before I could stand or speak, Patricia rose from her seat, champagne glass in hand and a smile on her face that didn't quite reach her eyes. "If I may add something," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the now silent ballroom. "I want to echo Robert's sentiments about welcoming Jessica into our family. It's been an adjustment for all of us, learning to navigate the differences in our backgrounds and expectations. But I think this marriage will teach us all valuable lessons about what really matters in life." She paused, letting her words sink in, and I realized with growing horror that she was about to cross a line from subtle condescension into outright insult. Some people might look at this union and see a young woman who has found herself a comfortable situation with a family that can provide for her in ways her own circumstances never could. Some people might even use unkind words like opportunistic, or suggest that financial motivations played a role in this romance. Gasps rippled through the room. Amanda's face had gone pale with shock. Ryan's expression was confused, as if he couldn't quite believe what his mother was saying at his own wedding reception. "But I prefer to see it differently," Patricia continued, now looking directly at me with that same cold smile. "I see a young woman who recognizes a good opportunity when she sees one, who understands the value of marrying into a family with resources and social standing. There's nothing wrong with being practical about one's future, even in matters of the heart." The ballroom was now completely silent except for the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Patricia had just publicly accused me of being a gold digger at my own wedding reception, in front of 150 guests, while pretending to defend me. The audacity was breathtaking. Ryan finally found his voice. "Mom, what are you doing?" "I'm simply acknowledging reality, dear. Jessica has found herself a secure future with our family, and we've gained a daughter-in-law who will hopefully learn to appreciate the opportunities that come with being a Thompson." That was the moment something inside me snapped. Months of subtle insults, condescending remarks, and passive-aggressive comments had led to this, a public humiliation disguised as acceptance, delivered at my own wedding by a woman who knew nothing about my character, my background, or my worth. I stood slowly, my champagne glass trembling in my hand, and looked around the room at all the faces staring back at me. Some looked uncomfortable. Others seemed fascinated by the drama unfolding, and a few appeared to be nodding in agreement with Patricia's assessment. "Thank you, Patricia," I said, my voice steady despite the fury coursing through my veins. "You're absolutely right that some people might look at this marriage and see financial motivations. You're also right that there are lessons to be learned about what really matters in life." I paused, taking a deep breath, knowing that the next words out of my mouth would change everything forever. "But I think the lesson might be different than you imagine." The silence in the ballroom stretched like a taut wire, every guest leaning forward in anticipation of what I might say next. Patricia stood frozen with her champagne glass halfway to her lips, perhaps realizing for the first time that she had pushed too far. Ryan's face had gone completely white, his eyes darting between his mother and me as if he was watching a car accident unfold in slow motion. I took another steadying breath and continued, my voice carrying clearly across the hushed room. "You see, Patricia, when you talk about someone recognizing a good opportunity, about marrying into resources and social standing, you're making some very interesting assumptions. Assumptions that reveal more about your own values than they do about mine." Amanda was sitting at the edge of her chair, her hands gripping the table so tightly her knuckles had turned white. She knew what was coming, but even she seemed stunned by the boldness of Patricia's public attack. "You've spent the past 18 months treating me like I'm some kind of charity case. Like I should be grateful that your family has deigned to accept me despite my supposedly limited circumstances. You've made comments about my car, my apartment, my job, my clothing, my inability to contribute financially to this wedding. You've discussed my worth as a human being in terms of dollar signs and social connections." Patricia's face was beginning to flush red. "Jessica, I think you're misunderstanding." "No, I understand perfectly," I interrupted, my voice growing stronger with each word. "You've decided that because I work as a librarian and live modestly, I must be poor. You've decided that because I don't flaunt wealth or social status, I must not have any. You've decided that any woman who would marry your son must be doing it for financial security rather than love." Robert had set down his champagne glass and was staring at me with a mixture of confusion and growing concern. Kevin looked like he wanted to disappear under the table. Ashley was whispering frantically to her husband, probably trying to figure out how to salvage the situation. "But here's what's really interesting about your assumptions," I continued, now addressing the room as much as Patricia herself. "You've spent all this time worried about gold diggers and fortune hunters, never stopping to consider that you might have it completely backwards." "What do you mean?" Patricia's voice was barely a whisper. I reached into my small bridal purse and pulled out my phone, quickly accessing the email I had received from Harold Stevens that morning. He had sent confirmation of the trust transfer along with preliminary account statements, as was required by law. "I mean that at exactly midnight tonight, I will become the sole beneficiary of the Morgan Family Trust, which, as of this morning, is valued at approximately $203 million. The effect was instantaneous and electric. Several people gasped audibly. Someone dropped a piece of silverware with a loud clatter. Patricia's champagne glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor, sending crystal fragments and champagne across her expensive dress. "That's impossible," Ashley whispered, but her voice carried in the stunned silence. "Is it?" I turned to face her directly. "Is it impossible? Or is it just incompatible with the story you've told yourselves about who I am and what I represent?" I could see the wheels turning in several minds around the room. People were recalculating everything they thought they knew about me, about my relationship with Ryan, about the power dynamics of this marriage. 200 million, Robert repeated slowly, as if testing the words in his mouth. "Give or take a few million, depending on market fluctuations," I confirmed. "The Morgan family has been in shipping and real estate for over a century and a half. My great-great-grandfather started with a single cargo vessel in Boston Harbor in 1870. My great-grandfather expanded into real estate development throughout New England. My grandfather diversified into stocks and bonds. My grandmother maintained and grew those investments while adding modern portfolio management." Patricia finally found her voice, though it came out as a strangled croak. "But you work at the library. You live above a bookstore. You drive that old Honda." "I work at the library because I love literature and community service. I live above the bookstore because I enjoy the simplicity and the proximity to downtown. I drive that Honda because it's reliable and environmentally responsible. None of those choices have anything to do with financial necessity." Ryan was staring at me as if I had transformed into a completely different person before his eyes. "Jess, why didn't you tell me?" I turned to face my new husband, the man I loved despite his family's treatment of me, despite his failure to defend me, despite his willingness to let his mother humiliate me publicly. "Because Ryan, I wanted to know that you could love me without knowing about the money. I wanted to know that you would stand up for me when people questioned my character or my motives. I wanted to know that you would defend me when your family made cruel assumptions about my worth as a person." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Ryan's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, realization, shame, and finally a kind of devastated understanding. "But you didn't," I continued, my voice softer now but no less firm. "When your mother made comments about my car, you said nothing. When Ashley suggested I was opportunistic, you changed the subject. When your family planned this entire wedding around the assumption that I couldn't contribute financially, you went along with it. When Patricia just publicly accused me of being a gold digger at our own wedding reception, you asked what she was doing instead of defending your wife." Tears were starting to form in Ryan's eyes. I thought I was protecting you by not making a big deal out of their comments. I thought if I ignored it, it would go away." "You weren't protecting me, Ryan. You were protecting yourself from having to confront your family's prejudices. You were taking the easy path instead of standing up for what was right." Amanda was now openly staring at me with a mixture of pride and amazement. She had encouraged me to defend myself, but I don't think even she had expected such a complete reversal of the room's power dynamics. $200 million, Kevin repeated, as if he still couldn't quite process the number. "You're saying you're worth $200 million. I'm saying that as of midnight tonight, I'll have access to $200 million. My worth as a human being was never determined by that money, just as it was never diminished by the lack of it. That's a lesson your family might want to consider." Patricia had sunk back into her chair, her face pale and her breathing shallow. The woman who had spent months treating me like an interloper, like someone who should be grateful for their tolerance, was now confronting the reality that I was wealthier than her entire extended family combined. "The Rosewood Estate," Robert said suddenly, pieces clicking into place in his mind. "Your grandmother's house. We always wondered how she maintained that property after the supposed financial troubles." "There were no financial troubles," said simply. "My grandmother chose to live quietly and privately. She chose to raise me with an understanding of the value of work and character rather than inherited privilege. She wanted me to find love and friendship and purpose without the complication of money influencing people's motivations. So, when we met, Ryan said slowly, when I asked you out for coffee, when we started dating, I was already one of the wealthiest women in Connecticut, yes. And you fell in love with me anyway, thinking I was a struggling librarian. Which should tell you something about the authenticity of our relationship, shouldn't it? The irony was delicious and heartbreaking at the same time. Ryan had genuinely fallen in love with me despite thinking I had no money, which proved his feelings were real. But his family had tormented me for months about being a gold digger, when in reality, their son was the one marrying up financially. The engagement ring, Ashley whispered. You let him buy you that modest ring when you could have afforded. When I could have afforded something larger? Yes, because the size of the diamond was never the point. The love behind it was what mattered. Something else your family might want to think about. I could see several guests pulling out their phones, no doubt texting friends and family about the dramatic revelation they were witnessing. By tomorrow, all of Millbrook would know that the Thompson family had spent months insulting and condescending to an heiress. Jessica? Patricia's voice was barely audible. I had no idea. If you had known, you would have treated me differently, I finished for her. Which is exactly the problem. My treatment should never have depended on my bank account. The basic respect and kindness you owe to any human being, especially someone your son loves, shouldn't require a financial disclosure statement. The ballroom was still completely silent, except for the sound of the string quartet, who had apparently decided to keep playing soft background music despite the fact that no one was paying any attention to them. But why reveal it now? Robert asked. Why not keep the secret longer? I looked around the room at all the faces staring back at me. Some shocked, some embarrassed, some calculating what this meant for their own relationships with the Thompson family and with me. Because, I said, I reached my limit. I can tolerate subtle insults and passive-aggressive comments. I can even tolerate being treated like I should be grateful for basic human decency. But I will not tolerate being publicly humiliated at my own wedding reception by people who know nothing about my character, my motivations, or my worth. Patricia was now crying quietly into her napkin. Whether from embarrassment, shame, or fear of the social consequences of her behavior, I couldn't tell. Part of me felt sorry for her, but a larger part of me felt that this public reckoning was long overdue. So, what happens now? Ashley asked, her voice small and uncertain. Now, I said, finally sitting back down and reaching for Ryan's hand. We finish our wedding reception. We eat dinner, we cut the cake, we dance, and we celebrate our marriage. Tomorrow, we go on our honeymoon to Vermont as planned. When we return, we'll figure out our future together with complete honesty about who we both are and what we both bring to this marriage. Ryan squeezed my hand, his eyes still filled with tears, but also with something that looked like newfound respect. Jess, I'm so sorry for everything, for not defending you, for not seeing what my family was doing, for letting it go on for so long. I know you are, I said softly, and we'll work through it. But Ryan, this can never happen again. If we're going to make this marriage work, you need to understand that defending me isn't optional. Standing up for what's right isn't something you can choose to do only when it's convenient. He nodded earnestly. I understand. I promise. Things will be different. I looked around the table at his family members, all of whom were still processing the complete reversal of everything they thought they knew about this wedding, about me, about their own position in the social hierarchy they cared so much about. I hope things will be different for all of us, I said. I hope this experience teaches us something about the danger of making assumptions about people based on superficial observations. I hope it reminds us that respect and kindness shouldn't be dependent on financial status. And I hope it demonstrates that sometimes the people we're quickest to judge are the ones who might surprise us the most. Patricia finally looked up from her tear-stained napkin. Jessica, I don't know how to apologize for what I've said, for how I've treated you. If I had known... Patricia, I interrupted gently. The fact that you didn't know is exactly why you should apologize. You treated me poorly because you thought I had no power to defend myself, because you thought my circumstances made me somehow less worthy of respect. That's not an accident or a misunderstanding. That's a character flaw that has nothing to do with my bank account. The wedding coordinator, who had been hovering nervously at the edge of the ballroom during this entire exchange, finally approached our table. "Excuse me," she whispered, "but should we proceed with dinner service?" I looked around the room one more time. The guests were still staring, still processing, still probably composing the text messages and phone calls they would make the moment they left the reception. The Thompson family looked shell-shocked and humiliated. Ryan looked like he was seeing me clearly for the first time in our relationship. "Yes," I said firmly. "Let's proceed with dinner. After all, it's still our wedding day." As the servers began bringing out the entree course, conversations slowly resumed throughout the ballroom, though they were considerably more subdued than they had been before my revelation. I could hear fragments of whispered discussions at nearby tables. $200 million, someone was saying. "Can you believe it? I always wondered about that Rosewood estate," another voice replied. "Makes sense now." "Patricia Thompson must be mortified," a third person added. "All those comments she made about the girl being poor." Indeed, Patricia looked like she wanted to disappear entirely. She picked at her dinner without really eating, occasionally glancing at me with an expression that seemed to combine embarrassment, fear, and perhaps a dawning realization of how badly she had misjudged the situation. Ashley was having a whispered conversation with her husband that looked increasingly heated. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could imagine him pointing out that she had just publicly insulted one of the wealthiest women in Connecticut and that this might have consequences for their own social standing. Kevin seemed to be handling the revelation better than his female relatives, perhaps because he had always been more focused on work than social politics. But even he kept glancing at me throughout dinner, as if trying to reconcile the woman he thought he knew with, the heiress who had just revealed herself. Robert, interestingly, seemed to be taking the news in stride. When he thought I wasn't looking, I caught him studying me with what appeared to be newfound respect rather than embarrassment. It occurred to me that as a businessman, he might be the first member of the Thompson family to recognize the potential advantages of having a wealthy daughter-in-law, rather than focusing only on the social humiliation of having misjudged her so completely. During the main course, Amanda caught my eye from her table and raised her champagne glass in a subtle toast. I could see the pride and amazement on her face, and I knew that she was thinking about all the times she had encouraged me to stand up for myself, all the times she had watched me absorb insults and condescending remarks without fighting back. As dessert was being served, Ryan leaned over and spoke quietly in my ear. "Jess, can we talk privately for a minute?" I nodded, and we stepped out onto the terrace overlooking the golf course. The October evening was cool but beautiful, with stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. For a moment, we stood in silence, both of us processing the magnitude of what had just happened. "I feel like I don't know you at all," Ryan said finally. "Not because of the money, but because of how strong you are. How you just stood up in there and completely changed the power dynamic of the entire room. I've never seen anything like it. You've always known I was strong, Ryan. You've just never seen me use that strength to fight back before." "Why didn't you? Fight back before, I mean." I considered the question carefully. "Because I was hoping I wouldn't have to. I was hoping that love would be enough, that your family would eventually accept me for who I am rather than what they thought I represented. I was hoping that you would defend me, so I wouldn't have to defend myself." Ryan winced. "I failed. You. Completely." I let my family treat you terribly because I was a coward, because I didn't want to deal with the conflict. Yes, I agreed. You did fail me. But Ryan, the question now is what you're going to do differently going forward. Because this isn't just about tonight. This is about whether you can be the kind of husband who stands beside his wife when she's being attacked, who protects her from cruelty, who values her dignity above his own comfort. I can be that husband, he said earnestly. I want to be that husband. Tonight showed me what I've been missing, what I've been failing to do. I promise you, Jess, I will never let anyone treat you like that again. I searched his face in the moonlight, looking for signs of sincerity, for evidence that this moment had truly changed something fundamental in how he understood our relationship and his responsibilities within it. I hope so, I said finally. Because Ryan, I love you enough to forgive what's happened so far, but I love myself too much to tolerate it continuing. We returned to the ballroom to find that the mood had shifted significantly. The revelation had broken something in the room's social dynamics, but it had also created space for more authentic interactions. Several guests approached me during the rest of the evening, not to apologize for their previous assumptions, but to introduce themselves properly and express genuine interest in getting to know me as a person, rather than as a symbol of whatever they had thought I represented. Harold Stevens, my family's lawyer, arrived just before the cake cutting, as we had arranged. He was a distinguished man in his 70s who had handled the Morgan family's legal affairs for decades. His presence served as additional confirmation of everything I had revealed, though by that point, I don't think anyone in the room doubted the truth of my statements. "Jessica," he said warmly as he approached our table, "congratulations on your marriage. Your grandmother would have been so proud to see you today." "Thank you, Harold. I think she would have approved of how things turned out." He smiled knowingly. "I suspect she would have particularly approved of your timing. Eleanor always did have a flair for the dramatic when it served a purpose." As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, I found myself reflecting on how completely the night had exceeded my expectations. I had anticipated some level of conflict with Ryan's family, but I had never imagined that it would escalate to the point where I would feel compelled to reveal my inheritance so publicly and dramatically. But perhaps it was better this way. Perhaps it was better to clear the air completely, to establish new ground rules for how I would be treated, to demonstrate that I would not tolerate disrespect regardless of what people assumed about my circumstances. The last dance of the evening was just Ryan and me, swaying slowly to a string quartet arrangement of "At Last," while the remaining guests watched from the sidelines. As we danced, I could see the Thompson family members at their table, still, looking shell-shocked, but perhaps beginning to process what this all meant for their future relationships with both of us. "No regrets?" Ryan whispered as we danced. I considered the question. Did I regret keeping the secret for so long? Did I regret the dramatic way it had finally come out? Did I regret the public humiliation of his family, however much they might have deserved it? "No regrets," I said finally. Everything happened exactly as it needed to happen. As the song ended and the evening officially concluded, I knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges. Ryan and I would need to rebuild our relationship on a foundation of complete honesty. His family would need to reckon with their prejudices and their behavior. The community of Millbrook would need to adjust their understanding of who I was and what my presence meant in their social hierarchy. But tonight, I was simply a bride who had finally stood up for herself, who had refused to accept disrespect, who had proven that sometimes the most powerful response to cruelty is simply telling the truth. The morning after our wedding dawned gray and drizzly, matching the subdued atmosphere that had settled over Millbrook like fog rolling in from the coast. Ryan and I were scheduled to leave for our honeymoon in Vermont that afternoon. But first, we had to navigate the aftermath of what was already being called the most dramatic wedding reception in the town's history. I woke up in our hotel suite to 17 missed calls, 43 text messages, and an inbox full of emails from people I hadn't heard from in years. Word of my inheritance revelation had spread beyond the wedding reception guests, rippling through Millbrook's social networks with the speed and force of a tsunami. By morning, it seemed like everyone in Connecticut had heard some version of the story. Ryan was already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed with his phone in his hands and a shell-shocked expression on his face. "Jess," he said without looking up. "My mother has been calling every 10 minutes since 6 a.m. Ashley's left 12 voicemails. Even my college friends are texting me asking if it's true that I married an heiress." I sat up and reached for my own phone, scrolling through the notifications that had accumulated overnight. Among the messages were several from reporters asking for interviews, 3 from financial advisors offering their services, and 1 from the mayor of Millbrook requesting a meeting about potential community development projects. But the message that caught my attention was from Amanda, sent at midnight exactly. "It's official," her text read. "Trust transferred. You are now worth $203, $7 million. Also, Patricia Thompson called my hotel room at 11:47 p.m., crying and asking for your phone number. I told her to call Harold Stevens if she needed to reach you. Sleep well, Mrs. Morgan Thompson." Mrs. Morgan Thompson. I had decided to hyphenate my name, keeping my family heritage while acknowledging my new marriage. It felt appropriate given everything that had happened, a symbol of bringing together 2 different worlds while maintaining my own identity. Ryan finally looked at me, his eyes red with exhaustion and stress. "How are you handling all this?" "I feel like my entire world has been turned upside down in the space of 12 hours. I'm handling it by remembering that nothing fundamental has actually changed," I said, reaching for his hand. "I'm the same person I was yesterday morning. I have the same values, the same feelings, the same love for you. The only difference is that your family now knows the truth about my financial situation. But everything else has changed. The way people are going to treat us, the way they're going to treat my family, the social dynamics of this entire town. My mother is probably never going to leave her house again from sheer embarrassment." "Art?" I felt a flicker of sympathy for Patricia, but it was tempered by the memory of her public humiliation of me just hours before. "Ryan, your mother's embarrassment is a consequence of her own choices. She spent months treating me with condescension and disrespect because she assumed I was financially vulnerable. Last night, she publicly accused me of being a gold digger at our own wedding. Her social discomfort now is a direct result of her behavior then. I know that. Intellectually, I know that. But she's still my mother, and seeing her so devastated is hard." This was the first test of the promises Ryan had made to me on the terrace the night before. Would he prioritize his mother's comfort over holding her accountable for her actions? Would he ask me to minimize my own experience to make his family feel better? "What are you asking me to do, Ryan?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. "I'm not asking you to do anything. You were right to stand up for yourself. You were right to call out their behavior. I guess I'm just struggling with how to balance supporting you with caring about my family's feelings." "There's no balance required," I said firmly. "Supporting me doesn't mean you stop caring about your family. It means you hold them accountable when they treat people badly, and you don't ask the person they hurt to minimize their pain for the sake of family harmony." Ryan nodded slowly. "You're right. And Jess, I want you to know that I've been thinking about everything you said last night. About how I failed to defend you. About how I chose comfort over confrontation. I hate that it took something this dramatic for me to see what was happening. What matters now is what you do going forward." Our conversation was interrupted by a knock at the hotel room door. Ryan went to answer it and returned with Harold Stevens, who was carrying a leather briefcase and wearing an expression of professional concern, mixed with what might have been amusement. "Good morning, Jessica. Ryan, I apologize for the early visit, but given last night's events, I thought it might be wise to discuss some practical matters before you leave for your honeymoon. Harold settled into the sitting area of our suite and opened his briefcase, pulling out several thick folders. First, the good news. The trust transfer was completed successfully at midnight, and all assets are now under your direct control. The total value as of this morning is $203.7 million, as Amanda mentioned in her text. Ryan's eyes widened slightly. Even hearing the number for the second time, the magnitude of it seemed to hit him anew. Now, the complicated news, Harold continued. Your revelation last night has attracted considerable attention. Not all of it welcome. I've already received calls from 3 different journalists, 2 financial publications, and someone claiming to represent a reality television production company. There's also been some movement in social media that we'll want to monitor. I felt my stomach drop. I had been so focused on defending myself against the Thompson family's accusations that I hadn't fully considered how public my revelation would become. What kind of social media movement? Someone apparently recorded portions of last night's events on their phone. There's a video circulating that shows Patricia's speech and part of your response. It's been shared several hundred times since early this morning, mostly with commentary about wealthy people hiding their status and the dangers of making assumptions about others. Ryan buried his face in his hands. This is a nightmare. Actually, Harold said, the public response has been largely supportive of Jessica. Most of the comments I've seen are praising her for standing up to what people are calling classist bullying. The Thompson family, on the other hand, is not faring well in the court of public opinion. I wasn't sure how to feel about becoming an unwitting symbol of wealth inequality and social justice. All I had wanted was to defend myself against cruel assumptions and disrespectful treatment. What do we need to do? I asked. For now, nothing. Let the initial wave of attention die down while you're on your honeymoon. When you return, we'll assess whether any formal response is needed. In the meantime, I've taken the liberty of arranging for increased security at both your apartment and the Rosewood Estate, just as a precaution. The mention of Rosewood Estate reminded me that I now had decisions to make about how to manage my inherited properties and investments. For the past year, I had been living as if the estate didn't exist, but now I would need to figure out what role it would play in my married life. Harold, I think Ryan and I will need to visit Rosewood when we get back from Vermont. It's time he saw the full scope of what we're dealing with. Ryan looked at me with curiosity. I've driven past the estate entrance, but I've never actually seen the house or the grounds. It's substantial, Harold said diplomatically. 47 rooms, including a full ballroom, library, conservatory, and guest wing. The grounds cover 127 acres with formal gardens, a tennis court, and stables. There's also a smaller carriage house that could serve as a residence on its own. 47 rooms, Ryan repeated faintly. After Harold left, Ryan and I finished packing for our honeymoon, while trying to ignore the constant stream of phone calls and text messages. I had turned off notifications for social media, but Amanda was sending periodic updates about the online conversations surrounding our wedding. You're trending on Twitter, she texted. The hashtag is #Millbrook heiress, and it's mostly people sharing their own stories about being judged for their appearance or background. Also, someone started a TikTok account called Patricia Watch. That's just videos of people making assumptions about others and then being proven wrong. The internet is weird. As we drove north toward Vermont in Ryan's pickup truck, loaded with our modest honeymoon luggage, I found myself reflecting on how surreal the entire situation had become. 24 hours ago, I had been Jessica the librarian, secretly dreading my own wedding reception. Now, I was Jessica the trending topic, accidentally sparking conversations about wealth, class, and social assumptions across social media platforms. Do you regret it? Ryan asked as we crossed the state line into Vermont, perhaps reading my thoughtful mood. Which part? Any of it. Keeping the secret so long, revealing it so dramatically, the the way everything has spiraled beyond what you intended. I considered the question as we drove through small New England towns that looked like they belonged on postcards. Did I regret the secrecy that had allowed Ryan's family to mistreat me for so long? Did I regret the public nature of my revelation, which had now made our private conflict into a social media phenomenon? I regret that it was necessary, I said finally. I regret that your family's behavior forced me into a position where I felt I had to defend myself so dramatically. But no, I don't regret standing up for myself, and I don't regret showing them the consequences of their assumptions. Our bed and breakfast in Stowe was a charming Victorian house run by an elderly couple who clearly recognized Ryan from his previous visit but showed no signs of knowing about our recent internet fame. For 3 blissful days, we hiked mountain trails, visited local craft breweries, and talked through the implications of our dramatically changed circumstances. I keep thinking about what you said, Ryan told me as we sat on the porch of our room, watching the fall foliage shift in the evening breeze. About how I chose comfort over confrontation. I've been doing that my whole life, not just with you. What do you mean? I mean that whenever there's been conflict in my family, whenever someone's been treated unfairly, or someone said something cruel, I've always taken the path of least resistance. I've told myself I was keeping the peace, but really I was just avoiding the discomfort of standing up for what's right. This level of self-reflection was something I hadn't seen from Ryan before, and it gave me hope that our marriage could emerge from this crisis stronger than it had been before. The question is whether you're willing to change that pattern going forward. I have to, he said, because I can't live with myself knowing that I let my mother publicly humiliate my wife because I was too cowardly to stop her. And honestly, Jess, seeing you stand up to her like that, seeing you take control of the situation and defend yourself so powerfully, it made me realize what I've been missing. You're incredible, and I should have been proud to defend you instead of hiding from the conflict. On our last night in Vermont, Ryan brought up the subject I had been expecting him to address eventually. What happens now? With the money, I mean. With our life together. What do you want to happen? I want us to be partners. Real partners, where we make decisions together and support each other completely. But Jess, I also want to be honest about how intimidating this is for me. You're now worth more than I could earn in several lifetimes. How do I contribute meaningfully to a marriage where there's such a massive financial imbalance? I had been thinking about this question since the moment I decided to reveal my inheritance. How do you maintain an equal partnership when one person brings hundreds of millions of dollars to the relationship? Ryan, the money doesn't change who we are as people or what we bring to each other emotionally. You don't contribute to our marriage through your salary any more than I contribute through my inheritance. We contribute through love, support, shared values, and building a life together that reflects what we both care about. But practically speaking, we'll figure it out together. Maybe you continue with Thompson Construction but expand into the affordable housing projects you've always talked about, and I provide the initial investment capital. Maybe we start a foundation together focused on community development. Maybe we travel and see the world while figuring out how we want to use these resources to make a difference. You'd want me to keep working? I'd want you to keep being who you are. The man I fell in love with cared about building homes for families, about creating something meaningful with his work. That doesn't change because your wife happens to have inherited money. Ryan was quiet for a long moment, watching the stars appear in the clear Vermont sky. I love you, Jess. Not because of the money, obviously, but also not in spite of it. I love you because of who you are, including the strength and wisdom it took to handle this situation the way you did. When we returned to Millbrook after our 4-day honeymoon, the social landscape had shifted dramatically. The viral video of our wedding reception had been viewed over 2 million times across various platforms, spawning countless reaction videos, think pieces about wealth and class, assumptions, and even some academic articles about the sociology of social status reveals. More importantly, for our immediate situation, the Thompson family had become the subject of considerable local scrutiny and criticism. Patricia had apparently not left her house since our wedding night, and Ashley had deactivated all her social media accounts after receiving hundreds of negative comments about her behavior toward me. "The whole thing has been quite a mess," Robert told us when we met for dinner our first night back. "Your mother is devastated, Ryan. Not just embarrassed, but genuinely devastated by the realization of how badly she misjudged Jessica and how cruel her behavior was. That we were meeting at a small restaurant downtown rather than at the Thompson family home, which felt appropriate given the new dynamics we were all still navigating. How is Kevin handling everything?" I asked. "Better than the women," Robert I replied. "He's actually been doing some research about your family's business history. Did you know that Morgan Shipping was one of the companies that helped rebuild the new London port after the hurricane of 1938? Kevin found some old newspaper articles about your grandfather's humanitarian efforts during the Reconstruction. It was strange to hear my family's legacy discussed by the people who had spent so long dismissing my worth, but I appreciated that at least some of the Thompson family was making an effort to understand the history they had been so quick to judge." "Dad," Ryan said, "I need you to know that Jess and I are going to need some time before we're ready for family gatherings and holiday celebrations. Not because we're angry, but because we need to establish new ground rules for how she's treated." Robert nodded gravely. "I understand completely. And Ryan, I want you to know that your mother's behavior at the wedding was unacceptable. Even if Jessica had been exactly what Patricia thought she was, the public humiliation was cruel and inappropriate. Your mother knows this, and she's struggling with the weight of that knowledge." "Is she open to apologizing?" I asked. "Genuinely. Apologizing, not just expressing regret about being wrong about my financial status? I believe so. But she's ashamed, Jessica. Deeply ashamed. She's having trouble figuring out how to approach you after what she said." "Then perhaps she should start by examining why she felt comfortable saying those things in the first place," I replied. "The problem wasn't that she misjudged my bank account. The problem was that she thought my perceived financial status gave her permission to treat me with disrespect." 2 weeks after our return from Vermont, Harold Stevens arranged for Ryan and me to visit Rosewood Estate together. I had been avoiding the property since my grandmother's death, partly from grief, and partly because returning there would make my inheritance feel more real than I had been ready to handle. Ryan's reaction to seeing the estate for the first time was everything I had expected and more. We drove through the wrought iron gates and up the circular drive lined with ancient oak trees, the main house coming into view gradually like something from a historical drama. The Georgian architecture was imposing but elegant, with ivy-covered walls and tall windows that caught the afternoon sunlight. "Jesus Christ, Jess," Ryan breathed as we parked in front of the main entrance. "This place is enormous." The inside of the house was exactly as I remembered it from my childhood. Grand but comfortable, filled with antiques and family portraits, Persian rugs and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. Mrs. Henderson, the housekeeper who had been with our family for 30 years, greeted us warmly and gave Ryan a complete tour while I followed along, seeing familiar rooms through his eyes. "The library contains approximately 12,000 volumes," Mrs. Henderson explained as we entered my favorite room in the house. "Many are first editions, and the collection includes several rare manuscripts that scholars occasionally request to examine." Ryan stood in the center of the library, turning slowly to take in the rows of leather-bound books, the rolling ladders, the reading alcoves with their comfortable chairs and perfect lighting. "Jess, you grew up here, with all of this." I did. And it was wonderful, but it was also lonely sometimes. Money can't create a family or manufacture happiness. It can provide comfort and opportunities, but it can't solve the fundamental human needs for love and connection. In the conservatory, which was filled with exotic plants and featured a small fountain, Ryan asked the question I had been expecting. What are we going to do with all this? What do you think we should do with it? I think, he said slowly, that we should live here. Not because of the status or the luxury, but because it's your family home, and it's beautiful. And it seems wrong to let it sit empty when we could be building a life here together. I felt a rush of love for him, both for understanding the sentimental value of the property and for being willing to embrace such a dramatic change in our living circumstances. There's something else I want to show you, I said, leading him to a smaller building behind the main house. The carriage house had been converted into a modern office space by my grandmother, complete with conference rooms, high-speed internet, and all the infrastructure needed to manage the family's investments and philanthropic activities. It was here that I planned to establish the foundation Ryan and I had discussed, focusing on affordable housing and community development. This could be our headquarters, I explained. A place where we can work together on projects that matter to us, where we can use the inheritance to make a real difference in people's lives. Ryan spent several minutes exploring the office space, his contractor's eye evaluating the craftsmanship and functionality of the renovation. This is incredible, Jess. We could really do something meaningful here. That evening, as we sat in the estate's formal dining room eating takeout Chinese food off my grandmother's finest china, Ryan brought up the subject we had both been avoiding. What about my family? How do we move forward with them? It was a question I had been grappling with since our return from Vermont. Patricia had made several attempts to contact me through Harold Stevens, requesting a meeting to apologize. Ashley had sent a handwritten letter acknowledging her behavior and asking for forgiveness. Even Kevin had reached out, inviting us to dinner and promising that the conversation would focus on getting to know me as a person rather than relitigating past conflicts. I think, I said carefully, that we give them a chance to demonstrate real change. Not just apologies, but actual behavioral changes that show they understand what they did wrong and why it was harmful. What would that look like? It would look like them treating people with respect, regardless of their perceived social status. It would look like them examining their own prejudices and working to overcome them. It would look like them supporting causes that help people rather than just maintaining their own social position. And if they can do that, then maybe we can rebuild relationships with them. But Ryan, I need you to understand that my forgiveness isn't unconditional. If they revert to their old patterns of behavior, if they start treating other people the way they treated me, I won't pretend everything is fine for the sake of family harmony. I wouldn't ask you to, he said firmly. Honestly, Jess, going through this whole experience has opened my eyes to a lot of things about my family that I had been ignoring or making excuses for. It's not just about how they treated you. It's about their attitudes toward anyone they perceive as being beneath them socially or financially. 3 months after our wedding, we hosted our first official event at Rosewood Estate. It was a community meeting to discuss affordable housing development in Millbrook, bringing together local officials, community advocates, potential residents, and yes, members of the Thompson family. Patricia arrived looking nervous but determined, accompanied by Robert and Kevin. Ashley had moved back to New York after the social fallout from our wedding, claiming she needed distance from the situation, though I suspected she simply couldn't handle the damage to her local reputation. Jessica. Patricia approached me before the meeting began, her voice barely above a whisper. Thank you for inviting us. I know I don't deserve the opportunity to be here after what I said to you. This isn't about what you deserve, Patricia. It's about whether you're willing to be part of building something positive for this community. The meeting was productive and energizing, with genuine enthusiasm from all participants about creating housing options that would allow teachers, firefighters, service workers, and young families to afford living in Millbrook. Ryan presented preliminary plans for a development that would blend affordability with attractive design, while I outlined the funding structure that would make the project financially viable. What struck me most was watching Patricia throughout the meeting. She listened carefully to community members describing their housing challenges, asked thoughtful questions about implementation timelines, and volunteered to help with research about zoning regulations. For the first time since I had known her, she seemed focused on something other than social status and appearances. After the meeting, as guests mingled in the conservatory over coffee and pastries, Patricia approached me again. "Jessica, may I speak with you privately?" We stepped into the library, where Patricia stood for a moment looking around at the thousands of books, the family portraits, the evident history and culture that filled the room. "I owe you an apology that goes far beyond what I said at your wedding," she began. "I've spent the past 3 months in therapy, trying to understand why I felt entitled to treat you the way I did, why I made such cruel assumptions about your character and motivations." I waited for her to continue, curious about what insights her therapy might have provided. "What I've realized is that I was projecting my own insecurities onto you. I was so afraid of losing social status, so worried about what other people might think about our family, that I treated you like a threat rather than like a person. I convinced myself that you were opportunistic because I couldn't admit that. I was the one obsessed with money and social position." This was a level of self-awareness I hadn't expected from Patricia, and it suggested that her apology might be more genuine than I had anticipated. "I also realized," she continued, "that I never bothered to get to know you as an individual. I made assumptions based on superficial observations and never tried to understand your character, your values, your intelligence, or your contributions to Ryan's life. That failure was entirely mine, and it led me to treat you with unconscionable cruelty." "What made you realize this?" I asked, watching the video of that night, honestly. Seeing myself from the outside, hearing the words I used, understanding how I must have appeared to everyone in that room. But also seeing your response, seeing your dignity and strength in the face of my attacks. It made me realize that I had been viewing you as someone to be managed or controlled, rather than someone to be respected and valued. Patricia's eyes filled with tears, but she continued speaking. "I know that apologies can't undo the harm I caused. I know that my behavior reflected deep character flaws that have nothing to do with whether I knew about your inheritance. But I wanted you to know that I'm working to change those flaws, and I hope that someday I might be worthy of being part of your and Ryan's life." "Patricia," I said gently, "the fact that you're doing this work, that you're examining your own behavior and motivations, suggests that change is possible. I appreciate your apology, and I appreciate your honesty about what drove your actions. Does that mean you can forgive me? It means I'm willing to see what you do with this self-awareness going forward. Forgiveness isn't just about apologies, Patricia. It's about demonstrating through actions that you've learned from your mistakes, and that you're committed to treating people differently." Over the following months, Patricia proved that her transformation was genuine. She became one of the most active volunteers for our affordable housing project, spending hours researching policy implications and community impact studies. She also began volunteering at a local food pantry and joined a community organization focused on supporting immigrant families. More importantly, I watched her interactions with service workers, with people she perceived as having less social status, with anyone who might have been vulnerable to the kind of treatment she had given me. Her behavior was consistently respectful and considerate, suggesting that she had truly internalized the lessons from our wedding night confrontation. Ryan's own growth during this period was equally impressive. He had always been a good person, with strong values, but he had lacked the courage to act on those values when it required confronting authority figures or challenging family dynamics. Now I watched him confidently advocate for community needs in town meetings, respectfully but firmly disagree with his father about business practices, and consistently prioritize doing what was right over maintaining social comfort. You know what I've learned? He told me one evening as we sat in the estate's garden, watching the sunset over the formal rose beds. I spent so much time trying to avoid conflict that I never realized how much conflict I was actually creating. By not standing up for you, by not confronting my family's behavior, I was creating conflict in our marriage, conflict with my own values, conflict with the kind of person I wanted to be. And now? Now I understand that sometimes conflict is necessary to protect what matters most, that standing up for what's right might be uncomfortable in the moment, but it prevents much bigger problems down the road. As our first wedding anniversary approached, Ryan and I reflected on how dramatically our lives had changed since that October evening when everything exploded at the Millbrook Country Club. The viral video from our wedding had sparked nationwide conversations about wealth, class, and social assumptions, leading to speaking invitations, interview requests, and even a book deal offer that I had politely declined. More meaningfully, our affordable housing project had broken ground and was attracting attention from urban planning experts across New England. We had established the Morgan Thompson Foundation with an initial endowment of $50 million, focusing on housing, education, and community development initiatives. And we had built a marriage based on complete honesty, mutual respect, and shared commitment to using our resources responsibly. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had told me about the inheritance from the beginning? Ryan asked as we planned our anniversary celebration. Sometimes. But honestly, I think we needed to go through what we went through. You needed to prove that you could love me without knowing about the money, and I needed to prove that I could stand up for myself when pushed too far. Your family needed to confront their prejudices, and I needed to learn that keeping secrets to protect people often ends up hurting them instead. So no regrets about the dramatic revelation? No regrets about defending myself? No regrets about refusing to accept disrespectful treatment? No regrets about choosing honesty over false peace? On our anniversary night, we hosted a small dinner party at Rosewood Estate for the people who had supported us through our first year of marriage. Amanda was there, of course, along with Harold Stevens, Mrs. Henderson, and several friends from the library and the affordable housing project. The Thompson family was also invited, including Ashley, who had returned from New York with a notably more humble attitude and a genuine interest in contributing to our community work. As I looked around the dining room at the faces gathered, at our table, I was struck by how different this celebration felt from our wedding reception. Instead of social performance and careful navigation of class dynamics, there was authentic conversation about shared values and meaningful work. Instead of whispered judgments and condescending remarks, there was genuine respect and mutual support. "I want to propose a toast," Patricia said, standing and raising her champagne glass. "To Jessica and Ryan, who taught all of us that true worth can't be measured by bank accounts or social status. To the courage it takes to stand up for yourself, and the grace it takes to forgive others when they've failed you. And to the reminder that sometimes the most dramatic moments in our lives are exactly what we need to become the people we're meant to be." As we raised our glasses in response, I caught Ryan's eye across the table. He smiled at me with a look of pure love and pride, the kind of look that said he truly saw me and valued me for exactly who I was. It was the look I had always hoped to see from him, and it had taken a public confrontation, a dramatic revelation, and months of hard work to finally achieve it. The woman who had stood up at her own wedding reception to defend herself against cruel accusations was the same woman who now sat at the head of her grandmother's dining table, surrounded by people who respected her for her character rather than her bank account. The money had always been there, but the confidence to demand respect, the courage to speak truth in the face of cruelty, and the wisdom to use resources for meaningful purposes, those qualities had been earned through experience, growth, and the willingness to fight for what mattered most. Sometimes the most powerful statements you can make aren't planned or scripted. Sometimes they emerge from moments when you've simply had enough, when your need for self-respect overcomes your desire for social harmony, when you decide that truth matters more than comfort. And sometimes those unplanned moments of courage change everything, not just for you, but for everyone around you who witnesses what it looks like to refuse to accept less than you deserve. As our anniversary dinner wound down and guests began to leave, I found myself thinking about my grandmother, about the wisdom of her decision to let me experience life without the complication of obvious wealth, about her hope that I would find authentic love and friendship before money could influence people's motivations. She had been right about so many things, but most importantly, she had been right that the money would only be as valuable as the character of the person wielding it. Ryan and I stood on the front steps of Rosewood Estate, waving goodbye to our guests as they drove down the tree-lined driveway. The October air was crisp and clear, reminding me of our wedding day exactly 1 year before, when everything had changed in ways none of us could have predicted. "Ready for year 2?" Ryan asked, wrapping his arms around me as we watched the last car disappear through the estate gates. "Ready for whatever comes next," I replied, leaning into his embrace and feeling the solid foundation of respect and partnership we had built together. The future stretched ahead of us, full of possibilities for the good we could do, the love we could share, and the continued growth we could achieve together. And as we walked back into our beautiful home, I knew with certainty that sometimes the best stories begin not with fairy tale perfection, but with the courage to stand up for yourself when it matters most. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.